Hi, we're at the end of week 2. I wanted to post a video about the topic for our first essay, and in particular the 2 articles that we're going to be reading and how we're going to build this compare and contrast essay. I know this is an interesting and difficult topic. We don't like usually thinking about death because it's scary, it's the unknown, it can be painful for the person dying, it can certainly be painful for the people left behind. And so it's a complex topic that is very wrapped up into culture, religious belief, ethics, fear, psychology, all those kinds of things. So it's an enormous topic. One of the great things to think about when studying a culture's death rituals is that it'll not only show you how they structure power in a society. The pharaohs of Egypt got huge pyramids, right? The peasants didn't. But it also shows you the worldview of the culture. It shows you where they place humans in the scope of creation. It shows you what they think of as holy in a lot of ways. So we can learn a lot about a culture by studying its rituals if, this is a big if, we have to take off our cultural goggles and put them aside and try to understand the tradition through the culture who practices it. So take, for example, our death rituals and the kind of modern, common American way of death, embalming and burial, our funeral traditions, how we organize our graveyards, and or through cremation and scattering ashes. I remember reading about a tribe of people in Papua New Guinea, and when the Christian missionaries went there, like missionaries usually have always done, is to invade a place and let the people know that what they're doing is wrong, in the eyes of the missionaries anyway. Traditionally these people would cannibalize the dead, which sounds horrific, right? The idea of making a soup out of mama sounds just awful for a lot of different reasons, because it's such a foreign concept to us. And one of the the native people asked the Christian missionaries, well, what do you do with your dead? And, they explained, well, we say holy words and we bury them deep in the ground, and, we put a marker and we'll sing songs and tell stories. We'll come back and visit the gravesite, those types of things. And this is what the guy said. He said, I would rather be in the warm belly of a friend than in the cold, cold ground. And when I read that, it hit me, the idea that he thought what we did was barbaric. So I can make Mama part of my actual body, my bones and my energy, and she can actually give me life, was how they viewed what they were doing. That I can carry her spirit literally with me. And the idea of casting Mama to the cold, dark worms and beetles and all these kinds of things seemed barbaric to him. Because we're looking at each other's cultures through our beliefs. And that's not a very useful way to study other cultures, religions, societies, because we don't understand what's going on the way that the people who practice them do. So when we look at things like death rituals, and we read about the Day of the Dead, or we read about these practices in Indonesia, or we read about Tibetan sky burials. If you Google Tibetan sky burials, just be prepared. It's graphic. Basically, what they do is, because they're, in the Buddhist tradition, the body's just an empty vessel. We don't need it anymore. The spirit's gone. And so what can we do with the body that will be useful to life, to the world, to the universe somehow? And so they will take the body out and feed vultures. Now, the idea of turning mama into poo, whether it's vulture poo or our poo, is just, it seems disrespectful. It seems barbaric. But if we put mama on the ground, we're turning her into worm poo. So either way, I guess we just end up as shit. So, but anyway, if we view that through ours, that seems horrible, through our goggles. But if you can put on the goggles of the people who see this is the last useful thing, the last beneficial thing that the deceased can contribute to the world. They can foster life in other beings. They can see this as a beautiful thing. So we have to keep that in mind. The Dia de los Muertos isn't as different as the tradition we're going to study coming out of Indonesia. The one coming out from Indonesia is very far from our kinds of traditions. So we have to make sure to try to understand it through the viewpoint of the people who practice it. So that's one challenge that we have when we're looking at anything. And then we have that second challenge of it's uncomfortable thinking about and talking about, learning about, and looking at death. So looking at pictures of dead bodies and stuff can be unsettling to us. We can be very phobic or squeamish. And especially if you've recently lost someone, or maybe not so recently, talking about death can bring up all sorts of grief and sadness, in which case, I'm sorry for your loss. Most of us have been there, and try to get through the topic because it's worth looking at. So rituals persist because they're useful somehow. They're useful to the dead, we believe, or they're useful to the living. They're useful to society. They're useful to religion. They're useful to economics. They're useful somewhere. And so what we're going to do for this article, or this essay, is we're going to take these two traditions, the Dia de los Muertos and the one coming out of Indonesia, and we are going to try to separate out, okay, this part is done for the deceased. This part is done for the living. This part is done for both. And we'll see a lot of, that there's a lot, wrapped up in these traditions. If you think about our modern American traditions, we don't necessarily do these traditions for the sake of the dead, right? It's not that if I buy this granite tombstone, Papa will get into heaven, right? We don't have that belief. That's something he needed to take care of while he was still alive, right? We don't have the belief that, if we eat these certain foods on this certain night, it'll help make the deceased happy, right? Their spirit's dead and gone. We don't necessarily think that if I cremate the body, it's going to help the deceased move on into the afterlife. So our kind of traditions, even something as intricate as our funerals and embalming, we don't even do those for like public health reasons, right? We just embalm to buy us more time, and because we want to look at Mama looking peaceful. We don't want her jaw hanging open and her being pale, right? So we brutalize her body, pump her full of poison, and then put makeup on her so that she looks good for us. We know we do that for us. And then we put her in the ground and all those poisons leak out into our drinking water. And then the worms get her anyway, right? But we don't really, in some modern American religious beliefs, maybe we do think it's for the sake of the dead. Like some religious traditions believe the actual body rises up again. That's why some religions are against cremating, because they think the actual body is going to rise again. So some of our choices we make are for the sake of the dead, but most of them are for us. And so when you're reading through these articles about Mexico and Indonesia, I really recommend, when I was reading through it, I had two different highlighters, and when I read a passage or something that was explaining, okay, we do this because it makes the dead happy or it gets them into the afterlife easier, I highlighted it in one color, and things that was like, okay, this is for just us. We do it because it's fun and comforting for us. I do another color. And some of these things you'll see it overlaps, like this one thing is supposed to help us both. So that's what we're going to be comparing and contrasting in this essay. I've posted the assignment sheet, and we're going to go in depth into the Mexican tradition and the Indonesian tradition. We're going to compare it to ours, and we're going to find that ours is mostly done for us. Maybe the Mexican or the Indonesian tradition is mostly for the sake of the dead, or maybe it's equal half and half. So that's the focus that you need to have in mind when you're reading through these and writing your blog posts and thinking about them. First of all, we need to try to understand the tradition the way the people who practice it do. We need to put on their cultural goggles to try to understand it, because for us it could just be like, oh, that's cute. We like the sugar skulls, I'm going to dress up like it for Halloween, but we don't have an understanding of it, which leads to all those issues of cultural appropriation, right? So unless we fully understand it, we shouldn't practice it. But it can also be like specifically with the Indonesian tradition, it can be very shocking, or it can gross us out, or it can scare us, or we can think that it's wrong because we're judging it through our mindset, and we need to try to understand it through there. So that's our big challenge. And while you're reading it, try to pick out what aspects of these different rituals are done for the sake of the living, and which are done for the sake of the dead, because that's what this essay needs to focus on. So make sure to take a look at that assignment sheet. It's been posted to the Module 1 folder, and I look forward to next week's blogs.